It is January 11th, 2023, speaking at Benos Bina, talking about free will. This class is dedicated in loving memory for the Elias Neshama of Sonia Bas Hersh, passed away this past Sunday. How do we, why do we have, what's the point? Why do we have to have free will?
To make choices.
Well, I mean, so I just asked the question differently. So why do we have to make choices?
That we can get some
To be accountable, so we get schar. Good. So in other words, from a religious perspective, we have to have free will. Otherwise, the whole system of religion makes no sense without free will. There's no schar or onesh. There's mitzvahs and veras are what? It's like, I always make the joke of like Hashem's like a puppet master, and he's like, la 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 la, be a good Jew, don't eat the bacon, nom nom nom, eats the bacon, bad Jew. You know, like, do you get how ridiculous it is to offer reward and punishment if there's no free will, right? And it's funny because I've met people who say, there's no such thing as free will, Rabbi, and it opens up this weird, like, way of looking at the world. I'm like, okay, so if someone, let's say, I don't know, cuts you off in traffic, do you get upset at them?
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah. I'm like, why? They didn't have a choice. Oh, maybe you're upset at them because you didn't have a choice of whether or not you should be upset. But doesn't that mean that you don't have a choice whether or not you believe you have a choice? And doesn't that mean that I don't have a choice to believe that we do? So we're not really arguing. We're just bouncing off each other in a choiceless, meaningless universe. But the only reason you believe that is because you don't have a choice whether or not to do so. You see, like, you know how far down the rabbit hole this weird way of looking at the world is? Right? And then nobody actually acts like that. I have never met, and no one has ever met, in all the time that humanity has existed, a person who not only believed we had free will, but then followed all the logical conclusions about how you should live your life according to a person who doesn't believe you have free will. Because the moment someone does something to you, you get upset and say, why'd you spill my coffee out? I was still drinking it. I didn't have a choice. Why are you bothered? What are you upset about? Why should you not be upset about anything? Now, it happens to be, as I'm thinking about it, there are some versions of, let's say, Buddhism who actually try to live in this world, like total disregard of anything that happens in the world, because none of it matters anyway. But like people that we meet on a day-to-day basis don't live this way.
Dude, did you get into the whole thing with Buddhism at some point?
I never studied it in depth, but I did look into it a little bit. I think there's a lot of really cool ideas in Buddhism, right? But it's like, I remember I was in yeshiva and my rabbis were like, yeah, of course the Buddhists have a good idea. Abraham taught them, right? And he sent his secrets to the East. And I'm like, oh my God, Jews have to think we're the source of all good in the world. I call it Jew-itis. It's like when a Jew has to believe that anything positive in the world comes from us. And by the way, it could be true. I'm not taking away from that. That's certainly the rabbinic tradition is that when Abraham, you know the story. Abraham gives everything that he owns to Yitzchak, and then he has more kids from Keturah, who the rabbis say was actually Hagar. He married again, and then he had kids and sent them east with gifts. So the obvious question is, what gifts did he give them if he didn't have anything? He gave everything to Yitzchak, and Rashi says, tumos, shemos tumos, right, or something like that. I forget the exact lashon, like the unimpure names he gave them. What does that mean? It means like spiritual ideas of some sort, right? And so, like when you look at like really cool, interesting spiritual ideas in Hinduism or Buddhism or Shinto or whatever, it's like. What? Talk.
Oh, the whole concept, like chi, like this
Yeah.
thing to manipulate items,
right,
with energy. It's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool. Yeah.
Well, look, if you look in rabbinic tradition, there we have many stories of Jews manipulating energy of that sort.
Never talked about it.
It depends.
Whatever.
What's the line between avodah zarah and not is not always easy to see. Like especially if you're getting into the spiritual concepts, right? What about all the Kabbalists who create amulets? For hundreds of years, you had people who would make an amulet and you would wear it, right? And it was a Kabbalistic thing. Why isn't that avodah zarah? It's complex, right? They certainly believed it did. They certainly believe it did. You ever hear of the Baba Sali? Mm-hmm. One of the great. He was Moroccan, I think. Massive Torah scholar from 30 years ago, whatever it was. There are many people, hundreds of people, that tell stories about how they went to his house for Shabbat, and he would take a bottle of wine. It was covered, And he would pour wine for everyone at the table, and then remove the cover, and the wine bottle was still completely full.
How?
I assume that was a rhetorical question. Right? So you
Put the cover back on and it would still be full?
full bottle.
Wait, but you said it was a cover bottle.
He covered it with like a wrap, so you couldn't see what was inside. It was like opaque, and he poured for like 50, 100 people, full cups of wine. And then you're like, this sounds like, who was it from Tanakh? Elisha, right? What did Elisha do?
Alicia Keys?
Who?
I don't. Oh, Elisha. The fact that you put Alicia Keys in the same framework as Elisha Hanavi, shame on you. Shame on you. So Elisha, of the famous story from Tanakh of Elisha Hanavi, who this poor woman, she's like, please help me, I have nothing in the house. And he said, what do you have? And she said, I have like one small little jug of oil. And he said, go and borrow kalim, vessels from all your neighbors. And then he went, and he said, now start pouring. And she poured and she filled like cups and bottles and bowls, and just filled hundreds of vessels with oil until there were no more vessels, and then her jug stopped. Right? Like, so it's a very, very Jewish idea. But you're using, isn't it like magic? Like, what's going on over here?
It's a magic capsule.
It's you got to focus. Focus. Stay with me. Free will. I should know better by now. It's like, oh, you're going to teach with a Teres and Ben Azbina. Don't forget your Adderall. Okay, I'm just joking. I don't take Adderall. I mean, I took it once just to see what would happen. But I didn't feel any different. So you guys immediately got it, right? Of course we have to have free will. There's no point in religion without free will. The whole system makes no sense. It's a giant joke, right? Fine. But how do you know you have free will? What if we're wrong? What if we think we have free will, but really we do not? And there are people who argue like this. Yeah, it seems like a weird place to be mentally, but they'll say, well, how do you prove scientifically you have free will? It's like, I mean, is scientific proof the only way that you know things?
Yeah.
Does that mean that until the scientific revolution of just a couple of hundred years ago, no human being ever knew anything? I had this discussion with somebody. It's like, are you telling? Guy was like, hardcore atheist, science is everything. I was like, do you believe that there were ever any intelligent and reasonable people before the scientific revolution? He says, of course. He says, how? If you only know things by science, how could anyone have ever known anything before ever? And he was like, I love that effect. I love someone going, huh, I never thought of that before. Yeah. So you can't prove it in the laboratory. You can't disprove it either. It's not really a question that science can prove. Because they'll say, oh, you can see the person's brain waves and the neurotransmitters, and then a few seconds later, then they consciously aware of their choice. And so because their conscious awareness only comes after you can see on the screen what's happening in their brain, because there's this gap, that shows you that free will is not real. It's just a process that happens biologically, and then your brain fools you into thinking you have free will. I said, why? Why is that a proof? The fact that there's a delay between what happens inside of you and what you feel in your mind, is that a proof of anything? To me, they want to come and prove there's no free will for whatever reason, and somehow this is evidence for it. I don't see that as evidence at all. Not in the slightest. Now, you can't prove it either. There's no physical proof for or against the concept of free will. Okay, so there's no proof for it one way or the other in the physical world, externally, but we all sense it internally. We all feel we have free will. We all feel our choices matter. And we treat everyone around us as if their choices matter. You need to change your behavior. Why? Why should I have chosen differently? Oh, because you think I had a choice. Ha-ha. Good. So that's pretty simple, straightforward. Laid it out. Now the hard part, and also the fun part. How much free will do we have? Because no one thinks we have total free will. I can't just decide to lose 30 pounds and I'm so svelte, right? I can't just decide to have millions of dollars in my bank account. I can't just decide to be 6'2" and look like Brad Pitt. Although, as my wife says, even Brad Pitt doesn't look like Brad Pitt anymore, right? True. Oh, so vicious. It's okay. Still looks good. So what is my free will? So I want to share. I have a book at home that goes through 11 different opinions in the rabbis about free will. And I'm sure there are more, but there's 11 major opinions. I'm not going to share with you 11 major opinions. But I think I divide them into 3 major categories. I call them weak free will, strong free will, and balanced free will.
What is this?
The book?
No, what is...
There are 11 different opinions about how much free will do we really have. Everyone agrees we have it. No one says we have no free will. That's not a Jewish thing. But how much free will we have is an interesting discussion. Okay, we'll start with the weak one. Weak free will. You will probably not be shocked to hear that we don't hold by this opinion. That's not how we follow it today. But isn't it?
Different opinions of how much free will we have.
Correct. Talk about rabbis, right? The source the primary source of this weak free will is the Gemara, which says, you've probably heard of this Gemara, it's a famous one, called Biyadei Shemayim. Chutz mi'yirah Shemayim. Everything is in the hands of heaven, except for the fear of heaven. Everything is in the hands of heaven. So what does it mean, the fear of heaven? What's the only thing you have choice? So that's, now obviously the strong free will and the balanced free will, rabbis heard of this Gemara also. So they have to interpret it to their way. But the weak free will takes this opinion to its most logical conclusion. And it says like this: you have no free will at all except in exactly one thing. Do you recognize that everything was caused by Hashem, or do you refuse to recognize it? That's it. That's your only free will.
You don't believe in that?
No, not today. That's not the opinion that we hold by today, or that we teach, or that we follow today. But it's a legitimate rabbinic opinion. It exists. Now, somebody asked me in the other group, why are you mentioning this opinion if it's not like a thing that we do? And I say, well, because it helps you to understand the range. You can see the others. You understand the other ones better by understanding this one, even if we don't hold by it. Can you hold by it?
Wait, what's this?
Are you allowed to hold by the opinion that we have no free will except to recognize that Hashem is in charge of everything? Or not?
Because they're allowed to do whatever you want.
You're allowed to hold by it.
So that's actually machlokas, whether or not you're allowed to hold it. Because most rabbis don't hold it. Do you have to follow the majority of rabbis in hashkafa? In halacha, we all agree. You follow the majority of the rabbis, poskim, they psak, you follow the majority. Oh, well, I mean, we're talking about Sanhedrin. Nowadays, without a Sanhedrin, you just follow your rabbi, right? But when you're doing halacha in a halachic process and there's a machlokas, you have a vote. Is there a similar idea in hashkafa, in machshava, philosophy, Kabbalah, right? That let's say most rabbis say one way and a minority of rabbis say another. Are you allowed to follow the minority opinion? It would seem not. It would seem, even though I don't like this answer, I like to say, well, I want to follow whatever makes the most sense to me. It seems in our world, we do not follow that you can do that. You have to follow what the majority of the rabbis say in terms of hashkafa. I'll give you a fascinating example. You know that you guys heard of Hillel?
Hillel?
Well, yeah, that was his academy. It's called Beis Hillel because his students who followed after him, they're the Academy of Hillel. So Hillel was one of the great rabbis. So there's actually 2 Hillels that I know of in the Gemara. There's Hillel the elder and Hillel the second. I don't remember which one of them said this. One of the Hillels says that there is no person that will come called Mashiach. The Mashiach is a historical process of human beings choosing to connect to God and perfect the world. But an actual person coming and saying, hey, I'm Mashiach, change the world, he says, nope, it's not going to be a person. Now, is that an illogical opinion? No, it's perfectly rational. It's just none of the other rabbis agree with him. So let's say you're a Talmid Chacham, you're a Torah scholar, you really learned Torah well, and you looked at Mashiach backwards and forwards, and after everything, you personally come to the conclusion that this Hillel makes the most sense, and you want to hold by the opinion, you want to I don't think there's going to be Mashiach. People ask you, I can't wait till Mashiach, right? Mashiach, and you're sitting there going, the process, can't wait till it finishes, right? You're not thinking there's an actual person coming. Are you allowed? It seems like not. You're not allowed to hold by this Hillel. We don't hold by him. Nobody holds by him anymore. There's an actual person. Separate question. Separate question.
The hill you passes by everywhere except Shammai?
I don't remember. I wish I could remember. Yeah, there's two different Hillels. One of them is the Hillel and Hillel of Shammai, and the other is either his grandfather or his grandson, who's also called Hillel, but I forget. So either Hillel, or Hillel, the other one of them said this. I apologize. You can look it up. Like, just look up which Hillel, and you'll see. Now, so too by this opinion of free will. Even though there's a legitimate rabbinic opinion that free will is basically non-existent except for whether or not you recognize Hashem did everything, we don't hold by this opinion. And it would seem you're not allowed to hold by this opinion. Even if it makes the most sense to you in your brain, which it doesn't to me, but let's say it did, I wouldn't be allowed to hold by it and I wouldn't be allowed to teach it. Okay. That's a separate topic, but it comes, as we say in yeshiva, it comes agav, like along with. Literally agav means agav, on the back, means like along with. Now, let's go to the other extreme. So that's what I call weak free will. Weak free will is you basically have almost none. You have some, otherwise what's the point of anything? But the only real free will you have is, do I choose to recognize that Hashem is the cause of everything, or do I choose not to recognize Hashem is the cause of everything? But everything else that I do, did I get up on time this morning? That wasn't a choice. Did I daven or not? Did I eat kosher or not? Did I follow mitzvahs or not? Averas, whatever. None of that was my choice. Only do I recognize Hashem's hand in my life or not. That's my only choice. Okay, we don't hold by that. But you should be aware. Yeah. Question. Go for it.
It could be that it's not that different from other ones, because if you recognize to the max that Hashem is the cause of everything, blah 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 blah, like Shaviti said, like 37, you'd probably end up choosing the right stuff. So it's really not that different, no?
No, because you don't have that other choice. You simply don't have the other choices. This is the only choice you have. This is your option.
But wouldn't it logically follow that your actions would follow based
Nope.
on...
It's whatever Hashem decided. What you did is what Hashem...
Okay, I don't like this one. Shoot.
I also don't like this one. But you should be aware it exists. Now, is there anyone in the world who holds by this? No one that I'm aware of in the Jewish world, but there are non-Jews who believe like this. Muslims, technically, this is what Islam believes. This is the Islamic opinion. The word Islam means submission. You have to submit to God's will. Nothing else is free will. We don't hold by this, but there are people in the world, because it's not stupid. It's not illogical. If God's in charge, He's in charge, right? We need to have free will. Okay, this is the free will He gave us. All right. Now let me give you the opposite extreme. The strong free will opinion, which also we don't hold by. But there are more people who teach like this than the other one. There are a couple who still talk like this, including, I don't know if he still teaches this way, so I want to be clear, I don't know what he says today, but the Rosh Hashiva Reish Torah Rav Yitzchak Berkowitz, I heard this idea first from him back in 1998, right? So he taught this. If you asked him today, he might have changed how he holds. Okay. But generally speaking, we don't hold like this. Strong free will is such, let's say there's Billy Bob, and I want to kill Billy Bob. But let's say in the court of heaven, Billy Bob deserves life. According to strong free will, I could kill him. Hashem decreed in Shamayim that Billy Bob deserves life. And I come along and say, yes, but I decree on earth that he will die. And Hashem says, okay, do what you got to do. My free will is so important that Hashem will not save someone even though they don't deserve death. Now, Rav Berkowitz said, look, that sounds unfair, it sounds terrible. Don't worry. Everyone gets their cheshbonos. This person who died is a korban for free will. They died as a sacrifice. It's Kiddush Hashem. They will get enormous reward in heaven. They're not going to feel bad about it in Shemayim. Right? But on earth, your choices will not be stopped. And what's the famous source for this opinion? And then I'll take your question. The rabbis say that whichever way a person wants to go, heaven will lead them there. Question.
That sounds like the Holocaust, because like the Nazis' choice was to kill everyone.
Right. And are we saying that every single Jew in the Holocaust deserve death, right? It seems tough to say that. And maybe that's why there are people who hold by this opinion even today, even though it's not the majority opinion. It's not how we usually teach in yeshiva. But I heard one of the biggest rabbis in the world who taught like this. Maybe that's a cheshbon in their head. Like, I'd rather say that free will was paramount, because the alternative is you have to kind of figure out that this is what Hashem decreed, that 1 million Jewish children should die in the Holocaust.
Right. So then they say that it was just the Nazis' choice.
Right. And this is actually the first thing I ever heard. I remember when I was yeshiva, and I said, where was Hashem during the Holocaust? And the rabbi who answered, I want you to know that I understand this answer. I'm not the biggest fan of this answer. It's not a bad answer. It's just in my heart and brain, it doesn't click fully. It's not a stupid answer at all. It's a good answer. Is that he says, well, listen, Hashem gives free will. The question is not where was Hashem during the Holocaust. Hashem is where were people. People chose. So that's right. I don't have a board. Okay, on this side, right, free will, weak free will. Pretend I was writing. Weak free will is over here. Strong free will is over here. On the strong free will opinion is basically like this: Hashem gives human beings free will, and now he could always override it at any point, but he usually doesn't. Free will is so important that Hashem, and the example that one of my rabbis gave is like, look, think about it. Let's say I want to come kill Billy Bob, and then I slip on a banana peel. I miss my bus stop. The gun misfires. He suddenly ducks down to get something, and the bullet flies over. How many times has this happened before you start to go, something's going on here? Someone up there is looking out for the guy. It basically becomes a miracle. And what happens when you have a miracle? Not only is my free will reduced, but so is everyone who sees the miracle's free will reduced. Everyone who sees the miracle go, oh, look at what's happening. The person's protected. And so their free will is now a little bit lowered. And so to maintain the free will not only of the murderer, God forbid, but also of everyone who's witnessing what's happening, Hashem does not usually stop human free will from operating. When I first heard that idea, it made the most sense to me, even though I don't like it. But I've evolved over the past number of years, and I tend to go more towards the balanced approach, which is what we usually teach today. What's balanced free will? So balanced free will is that anyone, let's say Billy Bob, if Billy Bob gets killed, that was decreed in heaven that he should get killed. No one dies unless heaven decrees that it will happen. But what about my free will? So Hashem is such a master manipulator of reality that he says, okay, here's a person who wants to murder, and here's a person that I need to die, and he manipulates the reality in such a way that they meet each other. So the person who dies gets what they needed in their existence. The person who murdered their free will is still maintained. Hashem didn't stop them from doing what they were going to do. It's just that person's choice fit into Hashem's plan. Does this sound familiar? This is probably how you're usually taught, right? This is the normative opinion. This is now. It's crazy to visualize, to imagine how much knowledge and power that Hashem has over the universe, that every single choice of every single person who's in the world today is so perfectly manipulated Hashem that we all have free will, but everything that happens to everyone is from heaven. And that's why for a lot of people it's hard to understand. It's because it requires so much coordination. What a master puppet master is Hashem. That's actually why I like this middle approach more as time goes on, because it gives me more of an awe of Hashem's chachma and Hashem's power that He's able to create and manipulate a world so perfectly. So let's say Billy Bob. I'll use Billy Bob as an example. Excuse me. My apologies. Let's say a person, I don't know. If somebody cuts me off in traffic, I'm going to kill him. So let's say we're super simplifying the situation. There's two people. One of them deserves death, and one of them does not, from the eyes of heaven. By the way, I do, as I'm saying this, I'm recognizing in my head that it might not come across so great. Deserves death doesn't mean you're a bad person. Right? We get that. There's a lot of cheshbonos in the world. Right? And maybe this is how we answer the Holocaust too. Did all of these Jews deserve death? Meaning, when you say deserve, it means that this was Hashem's will. It doesn't mean they were bad people. So Hashem manipulates the world that the person who does cut me off in traffic is the one that he would want me to kill anyway. Right? Now, what's the source for this in the Gemara? Try to bring sources for everything. Now, the source in the Gemara is actually in the case of unintentional murder, not intentional, but the principle still applies. Let's say one person did an Aveira or whatever they did in private and there was no Beis Din, nobody caught them. You may have heard of this idea. It's they deserve Misa B'yedei Shemayim, right? They deserve death by the hands of heaven. Right? There's no one around. And there's another person who Hashem gives them free will. Are you going to be negligent or are you going to be careful when you're chopping down the tree in the forest? Now Hashem manipulates the world that they meet each other. Now this person still has free will. And let's say they were negligent. So what happens? The axe head falls off, kills the person who deserves death anyway. So perfect. This person fulfilled their free will of whether or not they're going to be negligent. Now they have to run to an Ir Miklat, right? And this person, they got what they exactly was decreed by heaven. But now let's say this person, they chose in free will to be careful and they didn't swing the axe. Okay, no problem. This guy will go on to the next case, right? This guy, right? Then he will move on until eventually the person who's free will give him what he needs. And by the way, Misa B'yedei Shemayim, it could have been an animal bite, it could have been falling off a cliff, it could have been, God forbid, a heart attack or aneurysm or something, right? But for whatever reason, the cheshbon of Shemayim is that I need this person to die by the hands of another person, let's say. So that's when the world is manipulated in that way. Now, let me just finish this off and then I'll take your questions. It's a tough one. And there's so many... each of them has... again, I'm like reaching back as if I wrote on the board, right? Each of them has its own difficulties. The weak free will, I think nobody likes. Nobody likes the idea that our free will is so weak. That's fine. There's like nobody holds by it. The strong free will is a lot more palatable to many people. And so there are more people that hold by it, but it's also not the majority opinion today. You should know, my rabbis taught me, the Rishonim, right, Rambam, Rashi, Ramban, etc. I don't even know specifically those guys, but I mean, I'm just pointing out the time period. The Rishonim held by strong free will much more. But the Achronim held by balanced free will much more. So why do we go like the Achronim more, not like the Rishonim more? It seems to be the influence of Kabbalah. Kabbalah has come in and kind of made it like Hashem really does have that kind of power. He really does have that kind of wisdom. He really does have that kind of control over reality, that everything can be so perfectly manipulated, which may have been harder to grasp without Kabbalistic teachings. Maybe.
When did Kabbalah come around?
It became more popular starting in the 1500s. It's been around. The tradition is that it goes all the way back to Adam HaRishon.
1500s?
That's when it starts to become popular. You have the Arizal in Sfas and the Ramak and then later on you had the Hasidic movement in Eastern Europe and the Vilna Gaon, who was also learning and teaching Kabbalah within his small circle to the students who were ready for it. The Ramchal, like that all started in the 1500s. There was always people, individuals, like according to most opinions, the Rambam didn't have access to the Kabbalah, but the Ramban did. Based on what they wrote. You can tell from what they wrote who had it, who didn't. Now, there's even one entire sefer that I heard of where the guy tries to show that the Rambam actually did have Kabbalah, he just kept it secret, but he hid the Kabbalistic teachings in his philosophical writings.
The Rambam
The Rambam.
at the same time?
The Ramban was like a few decades later, very, very close.
What year was it, the English year?
The Rambam was in the 1100s. The Ramban was like the early 1200s. So they were pretty close together. And Rashi was in the 1000s. Rashi was before the Rambam and the Ramban. Yeah, correct. So it seems to me that the way that we teach and the way that we hold is pretty much the balanced approach. Okay? Obviously, there are questions that will come out of it. And there are difficulties to try to deal with. But on the other hand, Hashem's really in charge. Everything. Every little thing. Every iota of existence is in the hands of heaven. Everything that happens, if it happens to you, it's because Hashem decreed that this is what you need right now. On the one hand, it's very comforting because there's no accidents. There's no person to override Hashem's will. Nothing's happening to me that was either arbitrary or malicious, right? if Hashem allowed this to happen to me, it's because He decreed that what I need in my life right now is to deal with this thing. It's one of the aspects of emunah. But don't forget, the people on those sides also had emunah, right? They just had to deal with this aspect differently. Now, why would anybody not like this opinion? The middle one. Why would anybody not like the balanced approach?
Maybe you're just mad at God for all the things He did.
It's easier to get mad at God. Yeah. It's easier. It's easier to get mad at God with the middle approach. When it comes to the strong approach, you say, okay, look, a person did it. It's not Hashem's fault. Right? Hashem allowed it to happen, but at least it makes sense in the system that Hashem created that He would allow these things to happen. But Hashem really is in charge of everything? Why would He do this to me? It's more emotionally, meaning the strong free will approach seems to make more sense almost emotionally. Whereas the balanced free will approach, to me, makes a little more sense intellectually, but it's a little harder to understand emotionally. Does that make sense to you guys, the way I just described it? Is that like this is the first time I ever said it that way. It's kind of coming out in this discussion with you. Let me say it again, because I think that makes a lot of sense. The strong free will approach actually is easier emotionally, because you can blame someone else other than God, right? But the balanced free will approach makes more sense to me intellectually. Hashem really is in charge, but it's harder emotionally because Hashem, why would you do that to me? That kind of thing. Okay, any last questions? Yeah. Explain the balance one more time?
Yeah.
So balanced free will comes down to